$750,000 fewer border crossings, new biometric screening, remote crossing permits canceled, stricter security protocols at every port of entry. If you're planning to travel or move between the United States and Canada in 2026, everything has changed. And I mean everything. Whether you're a student dreaming of studying in Toronto or Vancouver, a professional considering a cross-border career move, someone who regularly crosses for shopping or visiting family, or even if you're just planning a vacation, the rules of the game have fundamentally shifted in the past few weeks. Welcome back to the channel. I'm your host here at Info Express, and today we're doing a deep dive into the biggest migration and border policy shifts that just took effect between the United States and Canada. We'll cover what changed, why it matters, and most importantly, what you need to do about it. So grab a coffee, get comfortable, because this is going to be comprehensive. Let's dive in. Let's start with the elephant in the room, the numbers. And these numbers are absolutely striking. In 2025, we saw nearly 750,000 fewer crossings into Maine alone. That's just one state. When you look at the entire US-Canada border, which by the way is the longest international border in the world, at nearly 5,525 miles, the decline is even more dramatic. British Columbia, which has always been one of the busiest crossing points, thanks to cities like Vancouver being so close to the US border, experienced the largest drop in Canada-US border crossings compared to the national average. But here's what makes this really interesting. This isn't just about policy changes making it harder to cross. The data shows that Canadians are actively choosing to stay home. They're not being turned away at the border in massive numbers. They're simply not attempting to cross in the first place. Why? Well, there are several factors at play. The strength of the Canadian dollar versus the US dollar has fluctuated, making cross-border shopping less attractive. There's been a general shift in consumer behavior post-pandemic. And yes, the increasing complexity of border crossings is definitely playing a role. When crossing the border becomes more time-consuming and unpredictable, people naturally start to reconsider whether that day trip or weekend getaway is worth the hassle. For communities on both sides of the border that have historically relied on cross-border traffic, tourism, and shopping, this is a significant economic shift. Small border towns that depend on that traffic are feeling the impact. Now let's talk about what Canada is doing on the immigration front, because January 1st, 2026 marked a major turning point in Canadian immigration policy. For international students, Naker der Inibrusimrein, the Graduate School Advantage. If you're considering graduate studies in Canada, pay attention to this. Masters and doctoral students are now exempt from study permit caps. This is massive news. For context, Canada had implemented study permit caps to manage the explosive growth in international student numbers, particularly at the undergraduate and college levels. Some institutions were facing criticism for accepting far more international students than they could properly support. But Canada still wants to attract top graduate talent, particularly in research and advanced degree programs. So if you're a prospective PhD student in engineering, a master's student in artificial intelligence, or pursuing any graduate-level program, you're now in a privileged position. You won't be competing for limited study permit slots. This makes Canada an increasingly attractive destination for advanced education, potentially even more attractive than traditional destinations like the United States or the United Kingdom. For professionals, the Ontario Labour Mobility Revolution. Here's something that affects Canadians moving within their own country, but it's worth understanding because it shows how Canada is thinking about labor mobility more broadly. Ontario just introduced new labor mobility regulations that allow certified professionals from other Canadian provinces to start working within 10 business days. Think about that. If you're a certified electrician in British Columbia, a licensed nurse in Alberta, or a registered engineer in Quebec, you can now relocate to Ontario and be working in your profession in less than 2 weeks. Previously, interprovincial credential recognition was a nightmare in Canada. You could be fully qualified in one province and face months or even years of reassessment when moving to another. This created significant barriers to labor mobility within the country. Ontario's move is groundbreaking and other provinces are likely watching closely. The security tightening. But it's not all about opening doors. Canada conducted a comprehensive border security review throughout 2025, and the results are now being implemented. The emphasis is on stronger coordination between federal departments like the Canada Border Services Agency, Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. What does this mean in practice? Reduced irregular crossings, which refers to people crossing outside of official ports of entry. Much tighter monitoring at all official ports of entry. Better information sharing between agencies, and more sophisticated screening technologies. Canada is clearly trying to thread a difficult needle here, welcoming legitimate immigrants, students, and visitors, while maintaining much stricter security controls. The message is clear. Come to Canada through the proper channels with proper documentation, and you'll be welcomed. Try to circumvent the system, and you'll face serious consequences. Now let's flip the coin and talk about crossing into the United States, because if you're a Canadian planning to visit America, you need to understand that the experience has fundamentally changed. The new biometric reality, as of December 26, 2025, just days ago, the United States implemented expanded biometric photo collection at borders. This isn't entirely new. Biometric collection has been rolling out gradually, but it's now being applied much more consistently and broadly to all travelers, including Canadians. Here's what this means practically. Every time you cross into the United States, your biometric data is being collected and stored. Facial recognition technology is being used to verify your identity against existing databases. This is happening even if you're a Canadian citizen who previously enjoyed relatively quick crossings. The stated purpose is security and efficiency. The US government argues that biometrics reduce identity fraud and make it harder for people to enter under false pretenses. But it also means there's a much more comprehensive record of your movements and travel history. The enhanced questioning protocol. But the biometrics are just one piece. US Customs and Border Protection has implemented what they call more standardized screening procedures. What does this mean for you as a traveler? First, you need solid proof of ties to Canada. If you're employed, bring a letter from your employer or recent pay stubs. If you're a student, bring proof of enrollment. If you own property, having documentation of that can be helpful. The officers want to see evidence that you have compelling reasons to return to Canada and aren't planning to overstay or work illegally in the US. Second, you need clear documentation of your trip purpose. Vague answers like, just visiting or tourism, may not be sufficient anymore. Where exactly are you going? What will you be doing? If you're visiting someone, who are they and what's your relationship? If you're attending an event, have details about it. Third, specific accommodation details are increasingly important. Officers want to know exactly where you're staying. A hotel reservation confirmation is ideal. If you're staying with friends or family, have their address and contact information ready. Fourth, and this is crucial, your story needs to be consistent and credible. If you're traveling for tourism but can't name a single tourist attraction you plan to visit, that's a red flag. If you say you're visiting a friend but don't know their address, or can't explain how you know them, expect additional scrutiny. The reality check. Let me be very direct here. The days of casually crossing the border for a weekend shopping trip with minimal questions are fading fast. That doesn't mean you can't cross, but you need to be prepared. Think of it like going through security at an airport, except with more questioning and higher stakes. I've heard from viewers and friends who've crossed recently that what used to be a 2-minute interaction at the border booth is now often 10 to 15 minutes of detailed questioning. Some travelers are being sent to secondary inspection for additional screening, which can add another 30 minutes to several hours to your crossing time. This isn't meant to scare you, but you need to be realistic about the current border environment. Plan extra time for your crossing. Have all your documentation organized and easily accessible. Be honest and straightforward in your answers, and understand that officers have broad discretion in deciding who gets to enter. Here's a change that's flying under the radar for most people, but is absolutely huge for certain communities. Canada is ending its remote area border crossing permit program. So, what is this program? For those unfamiliar, the Remote Area Border Crossing Permit allowed people to cross the US-Canada border at remote, unmonitored locations where there are no official ports of entry. These are typically in wilderness areas of northern Ontario and Manitoba, places where there might not be a border crossing station for hundreds of miles. About 11,000 people use these permits annually. The majority are Americans who own property in remote parts of Canada, Indigenous peoples whose traditional territories span the border, hunters and fishermen, and people who live in communities where the nearest official crossing point would require a massive detour. Why is this changing? In the current security environment, both countries are uncomfortable with unmonitored border crossings, even in remote areas. The permits were essentially an honor system. You were supposed to report your crossing and carry your permit, but there was no way to verify compliance in real time. With advances in surveillance technology and both countries investing heavily in border security, the philosophy has shifted toward having every border crossing monitored and controlled, regardless of how remote the location. What's the timeline? If you currently hold one of these permits, it remains valid until September 13, 2026. That gives you about 8 more months. After that date, the program ends completely, and these remote crossings will be officially closed. Who's affected, and what are the alternatives? If you're an American who owns a cabin in remote northern Ontario, and you've been crossing at an unofficial point for years, you'll need to find an alternative route. This might mean driving several hours out of your way to reach an official port of entry. For some people, this could turn a 2-hour trip into an 8-hour trip. For Indigenous communities whose traditional territories span the border, this is particularly contentious. The Jay Treaty of 1794 guarantees certain border crossing rights for Indigenous peoples, and there are ongoing discussions about how these changes will be implemented in ways that respect treaty rights. The Canadian government has said they're working on solutions for specific cases, but the details are still being worked out. If you're affected by this change, I'd strongly recommend contacting the Canada Border Services Agency or your local member of parliament to understand your options. So let's zoom out and understand what's really happening here, because these changes didn't happen in a vacuum. After various security incidents over the past decade, both globally and at the US-Canada border specifically, there's been a fundamental reassessment of border security priorities. The US-Canada border was traditionally seen as one of the most relaxed international borders in the world. That's changing. Both countries are investing billions of dollars in border technology, personnel, and infrastructure. The US-Canada border may be friendly, but it's no longer casual. The reality is that technology now makes it possible to do things that weren't feasible even 10 years ago. Biometric screening, facial recognition, real-time database checks, drone surveillance of remote border areas. These tools are becoming standard, and they're fundamentally changing how border security works. Here's the uncomfortable truth. There's a genuine trade-off between security and convenience. The more secure a border becomes, the less convenient it typically is to cross. The question facing policymakers is where to strike that balance. Currently, both the US and Canada are leaning more heavily toward the security side of that equation. Whether this pendulum swings back toward convenience in the future depends on many factors, including the political climate, security incidents, and economic pressures from border communities. These changes have real economic consequences. Border communities that rely on cross-border traffic, tourism, and shopping are seeing reduced revenues. Businesses that depend on cross-border workers or just-in-time shipping across the border face new complexities and delays. On the flip side, enhanced security can also facilitate trade and travel by making the system more predictable and reducing the risk of major security incidents that could shut down borders entirely. Looking ahead, I expect we'll see continued tightening of border security, but also potentially more sophisticated approaches that use technology to speed up screening for trusted travelers. Programs like Nexus, which allows pre-approved travelers to use expedited lanes, might become more important. We might also see more differentiation between different types of travelers. Frequent business travelers with established track records might get expedited treatment, while occasional tourists face more scrutiny. Think of it like TSA pre-check at airports, but for border crossings. Let's get into specific actionable advice for different groups. If you're a student, here's what you need to know. If you're considering graduate studies in Canada, take advantage of the study permit cap exemption immediately. Application processing times can still be lengthy, so don't wait. Start your applications now for programs beginning in fall 2026 or even fall 2027. Research which Canadian universities are strongest in your field. For many graduate programs, Canadian universities compete globally with the best American and European institutions, often with lower tuition costs. Understand the post-graduation work permit program in Canada. If you complete a graduate degree from a Canadian institution, you may be eligible for a work permit allowing you to stay and work in Canada after graduation. This can be a pathway to permanent residence. Budget appropriately. While graduate programs may have the permit advantage, you still need to demonstrate sufficient financial resources to support yourself. For a master's program, plan on showing at least 20,000 to 25,000 Canadian dollars per year beyond your tuition costs. If you're an undergraduate or college student, understand that you're still subject to study permit caps at most institutions. This means competition for spots is fierce. Apply early, have strong academic credentials, and consider applying to multiple institutions. Be prepared for much more rigorous financial scrutiny. Canadian immigration officials have become increasingly strict about verifying that international students have genuine financial resources, not just borrowed funds for the application. Think carefully about which province and city you want to study in, because that will affect your overall costs, future work opportunities, and potential pathway to permanent residence. If you're a professional considering cross-border work or relocation, here's what you need to know. For Canadians moving to the United States, it's important to understand the visa categories available to you. The most common for Canadian professionals are TN visas, under NAFTA's successor, which is now called the USMCA. These are available for specific professions, including engineers, accountants, scientists, teachers, and many others. TN visas are usually a bit easier for Canadians to obtain than H-1B visas, which face caps and lottery systems. However, keep in mind that TN visas are temporary and don't provide a direct path to permanent residence, so definitely think about your long-term goals. If your employer is sponsoring you, make sure all your documentation is, well, impeccable. With increased border scrutiny, even small discrepancies can cause delays or denials. Now, for Americans moving to Canada, you should research which immigration programs you might qualify for. The express entry system for skilled workers is the main pathway for most Americans. You'll be assessed based on factors like age, education, work experience, and language ability. If you work in tech, healthcare, or certain other high-demand fields, you may have some advantages. Canada is actively trying to attract skilled workers in specific sectors. Also, consider the provincial nominee programs. Each Canadian province has its own immigration program, and some may be easier pathways depending on your background and where you want to live. For professionals moving within Canada, it's a good idea to take advantage of Ontario's new 10-day labor mobility rules if you're moving there. But, also research whether your specific profession has additional requirements. Some regulated professions like medicine, law, and certain engineering specialties still have rigorous credential recognition processes, even with the new rules. So don't assume it's automatic. If you're simply planning to travel across the border for tourism, shopping, or visiting family, here are some tips. First, document everything. Create a travel folder with all relevant documents. This should include your passport, driver's license, proof of employment or enrollment, travel itinerary, hotel confirmations or addresses where you're staying, and any relevant invitations if you're visiting someone. It's smart to have both physical copies and digital backups on your phone. Border officers may ask to see documents and, fumbling around looking for things doesn't make a good impression. Next, plan your story. I don't mean make something up. Just think through your trip logically and be ready to explain it clearly and concisely. Where are you going? Why? How long will you stay? Where will you stay? How will you support yourself financially during the trip? When and how will you return? Practice answering these questions briefly, but completely. Rambling or seeming uncertain can really raise red flags. Also, allow extra time. What used to take 30 minutes might now take 90 minutes or more. If you're flying out of a US city or need to be somewhere at a specific time, make sure to build in substantial buffer time for the border crossing. Rush hour at busy crossings can mean additional delays. Consider crossing at off-peak times if possible, though keep in mind that some crossings have reduced hours. If you cross frequently, consider Nexus. The Nexus program is really worth its weight in gold. It costs $50 for 5 years and allows you to use dedicated express lanes at land, air, and seaports of entry. However, be aware that Nexus approval requires passing background checks from both US and Canadian authorities, and current processing times can be lengthy, so don't expect to have your Nexus card for a trip next month. Plan many months ahead. And of course, be honest and respectful. This should go without saying, but never lie to a border officer. If you're asked a question you don't know the answer to, it's totally okay to say, "I don't know," rather than guessing or making something up. Remember that border officers have incredibly difficult jobs and deal with difficult people all day. Being polite, patient, and cooperative makes the process smoother for everyone. Finally, know your rights, but exercise them carefully. You have certain rights at the border, including the right to not answer questions beyond establishing your identity and citizenship. However, exercising these rights may result in being denied entry or subjected to additional screening. If you have concerns about privacy or your rights, it's better to address them after you're crossing through proper channels, rather than at the border booth itself. Let me address some special situations that come up frequently. If you have a criminal record, even minor criminal convictions can affect your ability to cross the border, particularly into the United States. A DUI conviction, for example, can make you inadmissible to the US. There are processes to overcome this, including applying for a waiver, but they take time and money. If you have any criminal history, research your specific situation well before attempting to cross. If you're traveling with children and you're crossing with children who aren't your own biological children, or if you're a single parent traveling without the other parent, carry documentation. This can include notarized letters of consent from the other parent or guardians, birth certificates, and custody documents if applicable. Border officers are very alert to potential child abduction situations, and having proper documentation prevents delays and difficult questioning. If you're bringing goods or items across, be very clear about what you're bringing. Declaring items may result in paying duties, but not declaring them can result in seizure and fines. Certain items like firearms, large amounts of cash, prescription medications, and food products have specific rules. Research what you're allowed to bring before you pack. If you're asked to secondary, being sent to secondary inspection doesn't necessarily mean something is wrong. Sometimes it's random, sometimes there's a question that needs additional review, and sometimes the officer simply needs more time than the primary booth allows. Stay calm, be patient, and continue to be cooperative and honest. Most people sent to secondary are ultimately admitted without major issues. So, what can we expect going forward? Let me give you my perspective based on the trends we're seeing. In the short term, looking ahead to 2026, expect continued adjustment to these new policies. There will likely be bottlenecks and delays as both travelers and border officers adapt to new procedures. Processing times at busy crossings may increase before they improve. We'll probably see additional policy refinements as the governments identify what's working and what isn't. I'll be covering these changes on the channel as they develop. In the medium term, from 2026 to 2028, I anticipate we'll see more sophisticated technological solutions rolled out. This might include more automated processing for trusted travelers, advanced screening technologies that can process people more quickly, and better integration between US and Canadian systems. There may also be political pressure to ease some restrictions if economic impacts become severe enough, particularly in border communities. Watch for pilot programs or limited policy reversals in certain areas. For the long term, beyond 2028, the fundamental direction seems clear. Borders will be more controlled, more monitored, and more secure than they were in the past. The era of the completely open US-Canada border is probably over permanently. However, this doesn't mean travel will be impossible, or even necessarily difficult for most people. It means it will be more formal, more documented, and more predictable. In some ways, increased security might actually make borders more stable and reliable, just less casual. Of course, there are wild cards, factors that could dramatically change this trajectory. A major security incident at the border could lead to even stricter controls. Conversely, a major economic recession could create pressure to ease restrictions to facilitate trade and tourism. Political changes in either country could also shift priorities. Immigration and border security are perennial political issues, and policy can change significantly with new administrations. So, what should you do? Stay informed, subscribe to this channel for updates on border and immigration policy changes. Follow official sources like the Canada Border Services Agency and U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Build buffers into your plans. Whether you're planning to study abroad, relocate for work, or just take a vacation, allow more time than you think you'll need for applications, processing, and crossings. Consider your long-term goals. If you're thinking about moving across the border permanently, don't wait indefinitely. Immigration policies can change, and what's possible today might not be possible tomorrow. Alright, let's wrap this up with clear action items based on your situation. If you're a prospective graduate student, start your Canadian university applications now. Research post-graduation work permit options, prepare your financial documentation, and apply for study permits as early as possible. If you're a professional considering relocation, research visa categories thoroughly. Consult with an immigration lawyer if your situation is complex. Start gathering required documents months in advance. And if moving within Canada to Ontario, understand the new 10-day process for your profession. If you're planning cross-border travel, create a comprehensive document folder, plan your travel narrative, allow significant extra time for border crossings, and consider applying for Nexus if you cross frequently. If you use remote border crossings, understand your permit expires September 13, 2026. Research alternative routes. Now, contact CBSA if you have questions about your specific situation, and if you're Indigenous and affected, connect with your band or tribal council about treaty rights. For everyone, stay informed about policy changes, document everything thoroughly, plan ahead more than you used to, and be prepared for a more formal border experience. Now I want to hear from you. What's your experience been crossing the US-Canada border recently? Have you noticed these changes? Are you planning a cross-border move or trip and concerned about these policies? Drop your stories, questions, and concerns in the comments. I read every comment, and your experiences help other viewers understand what to expect. If you have specific questions, I'll do my best to answer them or point you toward resources that can help. If you found this valuable, hit that like button so more people can find this information. These policy changes affect millions of people, and many don't even know these changes have happened yet. Sharing this video helps spread awareness. Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss future updates. Border and immigration policy is constantly evolving, and I'll be covering new developments as they happen throughout 2026 and beyond. Check out the videos I've linked in the description about specific immigration pathways, Nexus application tips, and dealing with border issues. There's a lot more detailed information available for specific situations. Look, I know these changes can feel overwhelming or even frustrating. The border crossing experience isn't what it used to be, and for people who remember when you could cross with just a driver's license and a smile, this new reality is jarring. But here's the thing. With proper preparation and understanding, crossing the border is still very much possible for legitimate travelers. Millions of people cross successfully every month. The key is being informed, prepared, and patient. Don't let fear of the new procedures stop you from pursuing opportunities, visiting loved ones, or exploring what both countries have to offer. Just go in with your eyes open and your documentation in order. The US-Canada relationship remains one of the closest bilateral relationships in the world. These changes are about managing that relationship more carefully, not ending it. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Safe travels, everyone.